All right, I think we're recording. Thank you all for joining us whenever you happen to be watching this. My name is Thomas Becker. I'm one of the admission counselors here at Center College, and I am joined for today's Faculty Friday, or whatever day of the week you happen to be watching this, by Dr. Amos Tubb, who is a former professor of mine as a Center grad myself. And I'm going to let him introduce himself, and we're going to dive in. This is the Faculty Friday I have been looking most forward to doing. So, Dr. Tubb, take it away.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Yeah, we were just reminiscing that Thomas was in a class that I taught almost a decade ago for first-year students, the English Civil Wars, and we had a good time.
We did.
Home swords and the like. So, what we're here to talk about today is like how I ended up at Center College, what Center College was like, what my impressions were, and how I see it's changed over time. So to see my view of Center, you have to understand a little bit of where I came from. So I was born in Berkeley, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. 3 years old, I moved to Crockett, California. My family moved to Crockett, which is a little tiny town of 3,000 people that's about 15 miles north of Berkeley, just where the Sacramento River comes into the San Francisco Bay. And the town only had 3,000 people because it was surrounded by factories and regional parks. So I grew up 2 blocks from the oil refinery on the West Coast. So if you've ever eaten sugar on the West Coast, it was made very close to where I grew up.
Thank you.
Delicious CNA sugar. California, Hawaii, that's the one. And then my elementary school and junior high school were right next to oil refineries. So Unocal oil refinery was one of them. So if you've ever bought Unocal 76 oil, that was manufactured right next to elementary school. So I had many elementary school and junior high teachers who died of cancer, right? Because it turns out you shouldn't be living next to a oil refinery. So that like school was, the next building was an oil refinery, like across the street.
We've come a long way in terms of planning in communities, I guess.
And it's all still there. It's all still there. So this town next to my town was called Rodeo, and it had 12,000 people. And again, these towns couldn't grow because of the oil refineries and the other factories. So these were the school district, a 12,000 person town and a 3,000 person town, a 15,000 person town combined, right? Which is the exact same size as Danville, Kentucky. So even though I grew up in the Bay Area, I actually grew up in a really small place. So we would go to San Francisco all the time. We'd go to Berkeley all the time. Like my father would buy coffee at Pete's Coffee, the original Pete's Coffee. But we grew up in a small factory town, right? Where they're union workers, the factory workers are paid very well, right? And yes, it was as deindustrialization was working its way through the workforce, but there's still lots of people who had jobs that in the parlance of the day were making good money. Because if you were a welder at the oil refinery, even at those times, you'd be making like $30, $40 an hour. It's a huge amount of money, right? So
sure.
In their front yard, right? Because they had a job that paid well. Also in Rodeo was the largest public housing project in the Bay Area. And when I was a kid in the 80s, there were lots of political refugees who came to California, and people from Asia and Central and South America, Mexico and Central America. And so the school district where I went to school, not every year, but many years, has been the most diverse public school district in the United States.
Get out of here.
Yes. So and you could see it change if you looked at the yearbooks from 1980 to particularly if you went to the present, but through the period there, I looked at yearbooks when I was in high school. There was like a section of the library that had old yearbooks, and it was almost like 90% white and 10% black in say 1980, right? Mm-hmm. 1990, that was not the case. It was, I would say 50, and by the mid 90s, it was like the United Nations. It was like the United Nations.
Cool.
Right. So I grew up in many ways like in the future. Okay. I grew up where white people were minorities, right? And in fact, there's no majority group because everyone was from everywhere. So it's not like some places where in the United States where there are immigrant communities where there's a whole lot of people who come from a certain part of Mexico who move to a certain part of the United States or Guatemala, right? Because that does happen, but that's not the place. Yet, you know, just think of every country you could imagine in Asia and in Central and South America, or sorry, Mexico and Central America, and that's who was around. That's who's around. So that's how I grew up. I went to college at UC Davis, which is north of Crockett, and I went there because I lived in a small town and I couldn't stand it. It was small. I loved everybody. I cared about everybody. I wanted everyone to be happy, but the town was too small.
You were just tired of seeing everybody.
I was tired of seeing everybody, right? And in California at the time in the 90s, while colleges were going up in costs, that University of California education was very affordable. UC Davis, actually, if you look at the graduation numbers at the time in the 90s and today, the graduation rate is actually the exact same thing as Center Colleges. So Center College and UC Davis are basically the same school in terms of who's there. It's just that UC Davis is 30, 40 times larger.
Right.
So I enjoyed going to school there very much. I like being at a big school. It was really good for me at that time. Never crossed my mind to go to a small college. And it's because I grew up in a little tiny town. My high school had 5 students in it, right? So I thought about what I wanted to do after graduation, like most normal people did. I majored in history, but I wasn't sure I wanted to get a PhD and be a college professor. What I was really into was actually urban planning. I thought that if you help,
you were going to go back to Crockett.
Exactly.
Move the refineries.
Exactly. Step one, put the refinery somewhere else.
Right.
So, but I only took one urban planning class when I realized that's what I was interested in. I applied to graduate school in urban planning and was rejected weirdly because I had no experience. So I had applied to a few schools to get to graduate school in history. And I thought, because, you know, I like history, I'm interested in it. What harm could it be to get a master's in it, particularly because they were paying, right? I wasn't paying for it.
Sure. Well, and the sneak peek ahead is like you do really like history and you're a professor of history. So.
Right, exactly.
But we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. So I went to UC Riverside, which is in Southern California, for graduate school. Now, so Riverside is, Los Angeles is on the coast in Southern California. If you go 60 miles due east, that's where Riverside is. And Riverside was built there because that's where the mountain range is that kind of encapsulates the LA basin. And so what happens is all the smog from Los Angeles is blown to Riverside and there are parks. So Riverside typically has the worst air quality in the United States. As late as 1990, there'd be, say, 250 days a year where the air quality was hazardous, which means that it'd be like smoking a pack of cigarettes if you were outside. It'd burn your lungs. Birds would drop dead from the sky. They would just drop dead. You couldn't see anything, like there's a gray haze everywhere.
You've got a real knack for being in some environmentally challenging places there, Dr. Tubb. I'm sensing a theme.
It's what, you know, I know where I'm called. And Riverside is of the UC schools. It's one of the reasons I got in. But it was, because it was the least prestigious of the UC schools, there was a very interesting development. When I was in college, affirmative action was eliminated at the UC schools. And what that meant was, in the selective UC schools, effectively at that time, the student body became almost entirely white and Asian. This is not entirely true, but if you look at the numbers, that's what happens. Mm-hmm. So many of African-American and Hispanic students people were still going to, you know, Berkeley and UCLA and stuff, but people were going to UC Riverside. And UC Riverside became the most diverse public university in the United States. So if you look at the numbers of UC Riverside, it became the most diverse public university almost every year in the United States. And so when I was there, the undergraduate population was like 25% white. And what did that feel like? It felt like home.
I was going to say, that felt like what you knew. Yeah.
That's normal, right? It's normal.
Yep.
So my experience, I stayed in Riverside. I enjoyed it. I became a graduate student, you know, and got my PhD there. It was a fantastic place. I totally recommend going to a place that maybe other people dismiss because it gives you options and opportunities you wouldn't get at a big name place, right? I got to teach a lot. It turns out I love teaching. I got to do that at Riverside. They took care of each other because it's a smaller place, right? They care about their students. It was a fantastic place to go. And what was it? The future, right? Which was the present for us.
Right.
Like in the 90s and 2000s. We're like, this is America, right? For me, this is America. And the thing about living in a place that's actually diverse, where people from all over the world, first generation immigrants are living together, is when you're interacting, you can't have any assumptions about anyone else, right? So to be as kind as they can be, as open-minded. The word might even be like tolerant. Like, and then you find out all these cool things because there's all these people from these different perspectives, right? Yep. Different family backgrounds. I mean, so once I was in my office, so I had students visit. I would encourage students to come visit me, and I teach these big classes at Riverside with like hundreds of people. And I had a native-born Black student, a native-born white student, a first-generation Hispanic immigrant, and a first-generation Asian immigrant in my office at the same time. That just happened to be the people, okay? And this is sort of a typical, like, people, right? Didn't think anything of it.
Sure.
In the class, I had talked to them about what's wrong with the fast food industry. And at the time, cows, when they were slaughtered to be turned into hamburgers at McDonald's, they were pretty traumatized. They would like, it's too much to get into right here, but
unhappy meat.
It wasn't happy meat. And that did get changed. And so now they're happy before they get killed. And so I explained to them like what's wrong with the fast food industry. And these students, we were talking about something with my class, but they brought up this point about the food in the fast food. And I told them that my grandma liked to go to Wendy's. And that when my grandma wanted to go to Wendy's, I would always go to Wendy's. And it was interesting, the two people who were born in the United States, the white kid and the black kid, they're both like, why would you do that? But the two kids who were first generation immigrants were like, of course you would do that. And it was this really interesting cultural moment, right? People who typically are here, who've been here for multiple generations, we think about like doing what we want and what's right for us. But and there are lots of people, of course, who do what their family want and what their family likes. But
sure.
From who came from a first generation immigrant family from different cultural background than people born, in the United States, they're like, of course you would do what your grandma wants, even if you don't like it, right?
Right.
Right, it's different people from different backgrounds have different perspectives on something as simple as getting a hamburger at Wendy's. And that was really cool. So I applied for jobs. So I teach British history, as Thomas knows. And I also teach history, medieval European, early modern European history, world history in the 1400 to 1900 range. Classes on the Crusades, classes on the English Civil Wars, the Wars of the Roses, British Empire, etc. So I apply for jobs. There's a job in early modern British history here at Center College. I apply and I'm fortunate enough to get it. So in 2005, we moved here. And it was quite interesting to me because the student
Say more.
In 2005, the student body at Center College, I would guess, was about 98% white. Now I could be wrong, right? That might not be the exact number, right? It might have been 95% white. It might have been 90% white. I don't know, but it felt like it was 98% white. So I went from a situation where I grew up and where I had taught, where it looked like the United Nations, right? To a place where I felt like I was in Scandinavia. And that was different. It was weird for me because I'd never been in a place that was virtually all white kids. And so I was initially a little flummoxed because I didn't realize that, because I'm from California, that there are places where you could go to college where everybody would be white. I didn't know. And that's because I was ignorant and naive.
We're all learning here.
So I realized that what I thought was normal was not normal for my students. And that, how I was saying earlier that everybody, when I would interact with people, you'd have to assume that everybody doesn't know anything about anything. And so you can't assume anything when you talk to people, right? That for these students, because they came from a very similar cultural milieu, that in fact, you could do that, and that's what they expected. So it was weird for them if I explained things in a way like I assumed nobody had any same cultural touchstones. And so that was something to get used to.
Mm.
And I mean, here, I'll just pick a silly example that in Southern California, if I said anything about Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail, nobody would get it. Nobody would get it. And then here, 15 years ago, a lot of them got it, right? A lot of them got it. So it's a cultural norm for middle-class white people in the United States for a certain group, and that's that you could tap into if you wanted to. Right. And it's something I wouldn't have done in Southern California because I would assume nobody would get it, right? I would explain, so there's this farcical comedy troupe in Britain.
Yeah, I get that this is funny. I know what this is, but I also know that you don't know what this is. And then it's just not funny.
It's not funny, right? And so it's only useful as a way to show like how political critiques worked in the 70s in Britain.
Which some people are also still very into, so.
Right, exactly. So, but here, that people got it because they watched it as kids, right? They got the they knew the joke about the land, air, speed, velocity of a swallow. These are all jokes from the Monty Python, the Big Fail. Exactly. So, I thought I had to think about that a little bit and how I wanted to continue approaching my teaching in a place where the demographics were so different from what I was to. But in my first year here, they announced they were doing a new program called the Posse program, where they're bringing in students from Boston. And what was nice about this is they were bringing people in from a different part of the country, right? And so again, a different point of view, right? And since I've been here, the admissions office and the college has really tried to diversify the student body by encouraging people to apply, right? And so the student body looks very different now than it did when I came 15 years ago. And what that has done is it has made classes much more like what I'm used to, right? Where people from different backgrounds, so you can't make assumptions. Right. And what's unique about this is it helps me model what is normal for the students on how you talk to each other, right? And the students don't need my help learning to talk to each other. But in class, it's useful to think everyone, if you have a lot of people from different backgrounds, you can't assume cultural knowledge. So you have to be explicit in what you mean as a student and a teacher. And this makes us better because it makes us be more thoughtful about who we are and why we think the way we do. Because one of the most important things about college is you learn there's a way you think about, what's right or wrong, what's good or bad, what you want, what value and meaning in your life. And a lot of those things are not going to change in college. But so once in a while, you'll be around people who have a different point of view, have a different idea about how the world should work. And that makes you both understand there are people who have different issues than you do and different perspectives simply because they've had a different life experience, right? And that doesn't mean that's something that you have to support or engage in, but to understand that that exists and that is a valid narrative out there, that's super useful for everybody because that helps you learn how to communicate with people here in the present. One of the problems of the present is that we've given space for people who shout, right? People shouting on the internet mainly and other places. I know. I'm sorry, Thomas. I'm bringing bad news, Thomas. And the thing is, when you're like when you're in public, you want to be your best self, not your worst self. And one of the ways you can be your best self is think to yourself, okay, if I'm going to make a point about, politics or economics or heck, even what I think about a movie, right? How would someone I disagree with on this particular issue, how would I make them listen to me? And the way you do that is not by shouting, but by crafting your comment in a way that's someone who has a different point of view would say, that's interesting, right? And the more you can do that, right, the better the country's going to be. Like we're filming this on July 31st, 2020, right? And the country is having a lot of trouble right now, not just because of the coronavirus, right, but because of politics. And the reason the political system, one of the reasons the political system is so bad is we create a space for people who yell, right? And try to hurt other people's feelings effectively. That's what they're doing. And basically all those people you should never read, you should never participate in, because anyone who's shouting and trying to hurt someone when they're talking, those people don't really have, they don't have validity. They've made themselves invalid because they don't want to come to solve a problem. They just want to shout at you. And we want to learn how to think about how to convince people in a thoughtful way of the validity of our own position, and then be open-minded enough to hear someone else's position, right?
Right.
And that's what we do in class, right? To train ourselves how to be open-minded so that you can see someone's point of view. Like, for example, when I was in college, right, I grew up next to factories, so everybody's a union worker, they're pro-union, they're anti-business, because it does seem like the large corporations don't care about you, right? They only care about making money. My roommate for 4 years in college was the son of a small business owner. And it was super useful for me to live with him for 4 years, because someone who owns a small business has a very different perspective on how to make it in life, as opposed to someone who works for a large corporation. One is not right, one is not wrong, but it's different. And it taught me to understand that people with a different life experience have different desires, problems, concerns, right? And that I remember that when I'm talking to different people and interacting with them, right? Because something, maybe a policy issue, for example, that might be useful in a place where there's an oil refinery next to an elementary school, that is a different situation than someone who's got a small business who is encumbered by certain regulations that make it almost impossible to run that business, right? Because the cost of running the business is so high, they can't run it, right? It's a different problem, right? Different situation, different problem. And so that's one thing you get out of the center education is it's not just talking to the professors, it's talking to the students, because the other students are different than you. And so as long as you're kind and open-minded and respectful, and by listening and asking questions, you can find a way. So like, you know, my roommate in college and I, we never voted the same way, right? You would say we have different political persuasions, we have different economic interests, right? Our professional careers have been different, right? And we're still friends, you know, we get Christmas cards, mailing back and forth. It's because we're respectful when we're talking to each other, right? And it taught a lot. And that's what's going to happen for the students who are at Center, talking to each other. You learn so much about the world around you from your fellows. And that's why I learned the good things about a small school. So for me, a big school was really good. And one of the reasons a big school is really good is I'm a fairly compulsive extrovert. I talk to lots of people. And there are lots of people who are like me or who go to Center. But at Center, at a small school in today's era, where so many young people, I left my phone downstairs. I could have had a visual. That one of the difficulties for the generation that's coming in now is that they have spent so many hours on a screen. I did as a kid. Is they've not had as many conversations with other people as I did as a child. And that's neither good nor bad, but it's different. And what it means is that sometimes they have a little harder time coming up with those random conversations with people before class, right?
Right.
That have just been natural to me, but instead people hide behind their phone. So if you go to a big school, you just see is everyone before class is doing this, right? When the professor is lecturing in class, everyone's on their computer like this. And of course they're playing, you know, whatever craft, not Minecraft, maybe they're too old for that. I don't know, whatever they're playing, right?
Whatever the kids are playing these days.
Whatever the kids are playing these days, right? Exactly. That quote could work forever. But you know, in my class, you're not allowed to use a computer. You take notes by hand because you actually learn it better if you take notes by hand, right? That we have reading where I require you to do the reading because I ask you questions on it because I expect you're a grown-up and you're going to do the reading, right? We're not doing reading quizzes because we're not children, like we're grown-ups. We have essay assignments where people write drafts for me, right? A typical student in my classes is writing between 5 and 8 drafts for a paper in a semester-long class because like I have expectations about what you're actually going to do, right? It's hard, right? Because I have expectations you're going to act a certain way because you're a school where we want you to act a certain way. But the other thing I want you to do is in those classes is complain about how hard it is with the other people in person, right? And so then you start bonding with them. And then you talk to them and they become your friends. People get married out of my classes. You don't have to go that far. I'm not guaranteeing that you'll meet your spouse.
But I mean, if you're if you're in the market, apparently there's some success if you're taking history courses.
This is actually true.
It is true.
And that by talking to each other and talking to different people, like, you know, you'll have a roommate and you might like play in a sports team, or you might join a social club, like, you know, whatever, that by talking to these different people who have different interests and experiences, you become a happier person because you realize I have all these connections around me of people who are interested, who care about me, and I care about them. And you find what happens in these small places is you create a kind of extended family vibe where when you walk around campus, you're going to have, you're going to have some close friends, you're going to have some people you know, and then you're going to have people you kind of know. But what that means is when you walk around campus, you're going to run into people you know all the time, right? So you're going to meet someone from my class the next semester who you're not best friends with, who you might have their phone number because of some group assignment or whatever. But you're like, hey, you know, Frank, so good to see you. And then you're going to chat with Frank. And you're not going to be best friends with Frank, but every time you run into him, you're going to feel good because you're going to have this nice little chat, right? And that's what it's like at a small school, that it gives you, it encourages more social interaction that people desperately need and crave. And then you see like, oh, it feels so much better if I'm engaging with people. One of the most beautiful things for me is at graduation. After graduation, we put up signs outside the Norton Center, which is like our big hall center, with our majors. And so the professors stand by the signs, and then students can come say goodbye to us and introduce us to their families. Oftentimes I've already met people's families, sometimes I haven't. And it's always a beautiful thing. But what's the best part and the most bittersweet part is they cry because they're saying goodbye to their friends. The students do. Not, you know, they're not crying when they're saying goodbye to me.
Well, they might. I mean, you know. They
might because they either allergies, they just got the grass. But you see these people who know that they've been in a place where they've met these people who've changed them, like their friends have changed them. And their friends, they are going to feel weird and different right off the cuff, but they're going to be the people who shape you the most, right? There's a reason all these students come back for homecoming every 5 years, 10 years. It's funny now, I've been here long enough. I'm like, hey, it's the group from 10 years ago.
You're like, oh my God.
Like, I'm so old. These guys are doctors now? Are you kidding me? This guy? Just kidding. I'm kidding. Joke.
But actually, we all know them. We love them.
Some of them might even be ministers. I don't know. They're all over the place. So I've got students who are doing all kinds of things, but they come back because they love their friends, right? They'll come see me, right? We'll have a little history thing, big hugs, good to see you. People have married, they have kids. It's so exciting, but it's their friends, right? And so, you know, my daughter's a senior in high school this year, and, you know, rising senior, she's going to be a senior. You know, I've told her like Danville schools are online now. And so I'm like, seniors, I didn't work when I was a senior in high school. We'll just blow it off entirely. Am I allowed to say that? Should I say that?
Why not? It's your faculty Friday. Say whatever you want.
Exactly. So she's applying to colleges. Hopefully she'll be a better student than I was a senior in high school. But one of the things she's looking at is the reason small schools seem so appealing is because she's seen the center students her whole life, right? She was 2 when we moved here. It's kind of hard to believe. She's been abroad with numerous centers groups. We've directed the London program twice. So we have study abroad and center and, you know, at different places in the world. So we were in London twice and we were in Strasbourg for a year, which is in France. So Eleanor, my daughter, has seen all these students, you know, at different times, and she can see how they're bonded, right? Because they know each other so well. And that is, man, that's a gift. Yeah. That is a gift. So when I was 18, there's no way I would have gone to a small college because I would have felt stifled, right? I am a generation later encouraging my own daughter, say, you should seriously consider small schools. And in the list we're starting to develop, there's a lot of, you know, principally small schools, because this allows you to sort of be more alive every day. The more you talk to people for real, the more you interact with people in real life, not behind a screen, like Thomas and I are doing now. that you feel better. You're happier, you're more content, you learn how to problem solve, you learn about different people's point of view, right? You learn to joke better. And all this sounds ridiculous for me to say this out loud, but it's true. And I mean, we're all feeling this now here. And what are we, month 4.5?
Yeah, but who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting, right? And we don't know how long it's going to last.
It has been 4.5 months, though. You are correct.
So you understand, like, if that this is what you, being around people is what you want. And when this is over, we're hopefully all going to value this more and be kinder to each other in the public sphere, but in the, in our more center sphere where people try to be kind. I mean, we're not perfect. There's mistakes and screw ups, obviously. Wait till you have your first roommate. You're like, what have I done?
I really appreciated the advice I got with my first roommate, which was they're going to be the best thing since sliced bread for like 2 to 4 weeks, and just left it there. And then someone leaned forward and was like, and after 2 to 4 weeks, the student life office is over here and would be happy to chat with you if you're having any problems. But yes, please continue.
Yes, I would say my advice for roommates is ground rules right off the bat. Like,
yes. Preach. Yes, amen.
If you don't do that, you're toast. So I hope that, like, after we come back and we can interact with each other, that we can see, like, oh, what makes us human is our actual ability to interact for real in real life. And
right.
That's what our classes, I mean, there are lots, we do lots of technology. I lose lots of stuff, I show you how to use a computer to do research, but I'm not interested in, that's just a skill. That's just learning how to use certain computer programs, learning how to do certain kind of research. That's an important skill, but it's just a skill. And to make you realize what you want out of life, we have to actually know each other as people and know your friends as people, right? And that's what you get more of here. And so that's why it's such a pleasure to be here, because I know so many of my students, and I watch them grow up, right? You get them as first years, you get them all the way through seniors, they become more mature, they're more self-confident, right? More self-aware, right? Happier on the way to crying at graduation, right?
Happy tears. And so that's sort of been my center, the arc of my center voyage. Wow. There are so many veins there we could dive into. Thank you, first of all. I mean, what an awesome arc, first of all. Great, obvious. The first thing I would say, because it's kind of the most recent thing that you touched on, is what would you say to a student who, is in their active college search process and is looking at big schools for the same reasons that you were, but namely revolving around this idea that a small college will be stifling, right? I'm used to a small environment. What would you say to them when it comes to a place like Center, with the caveat that there is a lid for every pot in the college search process, right? Like, Center is not going to be the right place for the vast majority of college-bound graduating seniors at the end of next spring. But what would you say for any student? We're hoping that any number of these conversations will be useful for people who aren't going to Center. But in ones who are worried about looking at a small school because they feel like it'll be restricting, what would you say to them?
And that's a really good point. And so for some people, it would be restricting. If you have a very specific interest that you have really delved into, a small school is probably a mistake, right? Because if really specific interests in architecture and a particular kind of architecture, you need to go to a place where there's somebody who's a specialist in that kind of architecture.
Right.
You're not going to be happy. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. If you're that person, you probably need to go to the university of fill in the blank of your state, right? Ohio State, wherever, right?
Sure.
But for most people, that what college teaches you how to do is learn, right? I don't know how to do everything, but I know how to learn how to do stuff, right? I know how to figure something out. So what we do is we teach you how to learn. And so most of us don't specialize in one particular kind of architecture, right? So a small school, the advantage of a small school over the big school nowadays is it's actually the antithesis of today's childhood. What's today's childhood? And so people in the last 20 years, it's been gotten this way over the last 50 years, but certainly in the last 20, is it's been professionalized. I mean, how many people do you know who were on the swim team where they swim 2 to 4 hours a day, 10 months of the year? And I'm not picking on swimming. I love swimming. I go swimming all the time. That's why I'm talking about it, right? Or do one thing, right? Full time for the whole year, one activity. Now, there is great advantages to really learning how to do something really well, and putting the time in to realize to get good at something takes time and effort and discipline.
Right. But
your life is a little richer if you can sample from different pots. And the reason, the way, weirdly, why a small school is better than a big school is because the bar is not that high to do stuff. So if you're playing the violin and playing soccer and you are interested in astronomy, weirdly, you can do that in a small school, where in a big school, it would be impossible because you'd have to commit just to being in the orchestra, right? Or just playing soccer. There wouldn't be enough time to do something else, right? Same thing with education. Like you have to commit to a major, which is bigger in a smaller school as a percentage of your total classes. So like we have students who double major all the time, like all the time, right? And it's because there's space to try something else.
Right.
And so weirdly, in a small school nowadays, like if you've never been in theater, you could try out.
Do it, please.
You could try out. We can teach you how to play the piano. We got people who teach you how to play the piano, right? I had a student who had never been swimming before. She joined the swim team. Now I'm not, it was a struggle, and the coach is heroic. And he's a fantastic guy. Totally recommend the swim team here, by the way. But you can do it, right? You can do it. And so the advantage of a small place is if you want to do more than one thing, you can actually do that. Where ironically, in a big place, it's harder to do nowadays because everything's gotten so professionalized. And in our little school, it's not as professionalized, so you can do multiple things. You can play a sport and study abroad. The first time we went to London was the first time a lot of football players went abroad. This 2008. And we had a great time. And after that, football players go abroad all the time, right? Because you can do both. You can play football and go abroad, no problem. And it's fantastic. So you're right, Thomas. For some people, this is not the right bucket, right? This is not the right place. And for some people, a big school is necessary because if you do have a very specific interest, you need to go to a big place because that's where you'll be happy. But if you're not, if you don't have a really specific interest, but you're like, I kind of like this, I kind of like that, I kind of like this other thing, you kind of could do that.
Well, and I think one of the amazing things too is that our professors are very much like that, right? You are obviously the example we're going to talk about, but you are not the exception. You are the rule, and a very consistent rule when it comes to center professors having multiple interest areas, and of course primarily academic as faculty members, but you are also advisors to campus organizations, and you are, folks who invite students over to your house or meet them for coffee, right? Like you are much more well-rounded individuals than I think the professor at the front of the 10,000 student lecture hall is. I think there's certainly a richness in that, and you have been involved in any number of different campus organizations and campus related roles that are not related to you being a faculty member. So feel free to touch on those, but I'd also ask if you would share not quite the Cliff Notes, because even that's too long, but like the adapted Cliff Notes version of what it is that you study and enjoy engaging in the classroom with college students with. If that was a, take your pick of that seed that was just scattered. Grow whatever you want.
That's a good question. Well, the thing is, Tom, the reason I study history is because history is everything, and I'm interested in everything.
Everything.
And one of the things, but the problem, now some of that I'm interested at kind of the third grade level. Like there are certain sciences where my kids are in the third or fourth grade. I'm like, this is the sweet spot.
This is cool.
Yeah, then it gets to like sixth grade. You're like, oh, it's getting hard. But I am interested in everything. And so what's so fun for me is to prep new classes, to learn new stuff, even if I've read about it before, and then think about a way to make it interesting and engaging for undergraduates. So what are the recent classes I've taught? I taught a class I called Knights and Barbarians, which is about medieval history. That was fascinating to learn about, from the fall of the Roman Empire to the Renaissance, right? When I was in Strasbourg, I taught French history from 1914 to 1945, because Strasbourg's right on the border between France and Germany, and went back and forth during all the wars there.
And a lot happened between 1914 and 1945.
These were busy times.
Correct. Correct.
And so I learned so much there. This last spring, I taught a class called Churchill's World, which was British history over the life of Winston Churchill from 1874 to 1965, which takes the British from the most powerful country in the world to not, right? And one of the reasons I taught that class is because when we were in Strasbourg, we made some friends there, and one of the friends we made is a judge on the European Court of Human Rights. And I had
friends in high places.
And super nice guy. He came and visited us last spring, not this spring, but the spring before last. And he taught the class. And Winston Churchill helped set up that particular branch of the Council of Europe. And so it was really nice to have someone like, so why did they create an international court of human rights right after World War II? What could have possibly motivated that? And then someone today who that's his job is to think about what obligations do the people who signed onto this treaty have for their own citizens, for migrants, for asylum seekers. And it's fascinating for the students to hear about that, right? So
right.
It's fun for me to learn new things. Now there's some like old classics I enjoy going back to, like the Crusades, it's always fun. Never gets old. But that I like learning about new classes. So like I'm teaching a class all for first year students, and I called it the Machiavellian moment. And
say more. What will you be studying?
We're exploring how in the 16th and 17th centuries, Europeans created a new idea about what it meant to be a human being, right? What is your role here on the planet Earth? So we'll read Machiavelli, The Prince, and we'll read some other books about individual characters, actors in Europe in the 16th and 17th century, and how they helped invent this idea that what we can do here in our life on the planet Earth is to know ourselves, make ourselves better, make our world a little better. And that was a very new idea, because previous to that, it was pretty much, well, life is miserable, then you're probably going to hell.
Yeah. I mean, that's the synthesis version, right? Like that's, if you were to sum up history until then, it was like, well, you can try, but good luck.
Most of you aren't making it.
Right.
Most of you aren't.
Right.
I love to read like 16th century priests and ministers' notes, because they started giving really long sermons, like 4-hour-long sermons, and weirdly everyone would fall asleep except for one or two kids in the front. I mean, parishioners. And they'd be like, see, everyone's going to hell except for, Lucy and Yvonne, because they're awake all 4 hours. And you wonder,
they're committed.
All the rest of them, though.
So you study really cool stuff, and you teach really cool stuff. And I have one more question after this, but this is one that I particularly want to ask you because I think you have a reputation around Center's campus and among folks who have taken your classes for a level of exuberance and charisma that not many other folks necessarily demonstrate in the classroom. I know I enjoyed and gravitated to your teaching style. I wonder if you might spell out in some way, why are you so excited to teach? Why is your classroom such a fun place to be?
So anyone who watches this, I paid him $10 to say that. So I'll pay you later, Thomas. I do expect you to pay.
He didn't pay me to say that, and I can get witnesses. But it is like your level of energy is virtually unrivaled among faculty members, even at Center, right? And Center faculty are incredible. But what is it about that approach that jives with you as an instructor? But also, why does that work for your students? Why is that the thing for you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's kind of you. Well, it's a couple reasons, because I really like it. I'm interested myself, right? And I am fairly high energy, sort of naturally. But it's also very calculated because I think a lot about my teaching. And as I was devising my own teaching style early in my career at Riverside and at Center, because it was different, let me tell you, teaching, like my last class at Riverside, I think had 525 students. And then, I went to classes capped at 30. It's a
little different.
It's a little different. Is that I thought about what makes people interested. And of all the professors I watched when I was a student and a graduate student, and I watched a lot, right? The professors who could tell stories and who showed energy, they're the professors you buy into. And so I thought very deliberately, okay, what I need to do is tell stories to people who know nothing about what I'm talking about. Really, like almost always nothing at all. And tell a story they can
English Civil Wars, very true.
Yeah, he's right. I just taught that class this last January, the last class, before we all went online. It was fun. And then that being around people who are into stuff, right? And when you're in junior high, you don't want to show that you're interested in stuff because you think it won't be cool. But it's actually really cool to be into stuff. And so I actually modeled my classroom persona on some of my favorite professors who were over the top energetically, but also could tell a narrative story, right? And that means that not everybody, but almost everybody can follow what I'm saying, and they're having fun with me. Not all the time. You don't get everybody, but it's always interesting to me because I'm writing the lectures, right, or assigning the reading, right? And then if I'm interested, if I'm energetic, they're going to be interested. It's also because as I got along, as I started teaching, more at Center and got used to different size classes, I learned that this is good. This is useful for anyone who wants to do anything professionally. I thought a lot about Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. I would argue Bill Clinton and Barack Obama are two of the most successful presidents in terms of giving high quality speeches and being able to answer questions about policy issues. Be incredible at it. But there's a difference between Clinton and Obama. Bill Clinton would feed off the energy of the crowd. And so when he would feed off the energy of the crowd, he would actually ascend to a higher place. Obama, it didn't actually matter what the crowd said. He's so self-possessed, he was going to ascend to his spot with or without us. I'm not saying he wouldn't feed off the crowd, but it was more obvious with Clinton. So when you're a teacher, you have to be both. You have to bring the peak like Obama, but you also have to be able to go higher when they give you energy back. And so I also about that. So even if my class, if people are tired, if it's an early class or they're having a hard time, which happens, like bad things happen to college students, right? So they're not engaging in class.
Right.
I be high energy even if they can't be, because it's a high quality place. They deserve Barack Obama. That's the level that they should be getting. And if they're in a good place emotionally, we usually go off the and we have a blast.
I agree. And yeah, I wish I had something more to say, but you said it all. So kudos. So my last question for you, and feel free to answer however you'd like. Center is not the only liberal arts college with great faculty members in this country. It's not the only one with, a handful of amenities or features. What makes Center and its student body distinctive to you? Having been here for a decade and a half, roughly, you have seen and experienced other places by virtue of the roles that you've had, by virtue of just seeing what other people are doing and other course areas, I'm sure. What is Center's special sauce for you that you've observed? And don't say we don't have one, because then this whole question line just
goes down the tank.
Yeah.
Well, we do have one, and the reason is our special sauce is, by and large, we're very gracious and grateful for what we have. And we're gracious and grateful for what we have, in part because, well, it's a very nice school, a very pleasant school with, everyone's taken care of. It is not as rich and as fancy as the very high-end liberal arts colleges.
Sure.
And so, because we're not rich, it's all, I realize it's all relative, but I'm comparing us to.
We don't have $1 billion endowment.
Right. We don't have $1 billion. And because we're not rich, we are just so happy to do what we can do. It's like study abroad. So this doesn't seem like a big deal now that almost all of our students study abroad. But when we started study abroad 30 years ago, nobody went abroad in the United States. People didn't send students abroad. And what we've done at Center is not only get almost everyone abroad, we do it for a fraction of the price of what everybody else does. So if you go to a different school and see what the cost is to go abroad, it's way more expensive, right? At Center, you basically buy a plane ticket and you can live in France for a semester, or in Britain, or in Mexico, right? Or in Japan, or in China. The list goes on and on and on and on and on, right?
Right.
And we do that because we don't have as much money, we have to think, okay, how do we solve this problem in a way we can with this small little budget? And when we do it, we're so happy we can do it. And that kind of permeates the campus. And people are just happy to be here, in part because of that, right? And so the students are happy to be here. It's a jolly place. I mean, when I talk to people, friends of mine all over the country at different colleges, interact with people at different colleges, there are lots of great places to go to college, don't get me wrong.
True.
Right? I love UC Davis, go Aggies. I gave them money. I think they wrote me a note. Thank you for giving us money. You're welcome. You're welcome. Maybe that was Riverside. That was the most recent. I can't remember.
It was somebody.
Somebody got money. Is that they appreciate the fact that we all care for each other, but we can't splurge on each other, right? Like when you're abroad at like the most recent time, I think that the students got $9 a day for food money. And we would talk about ways to make $9 a day work, which totally work. It does work. You just have to be smart about it, right? And then we always have the students over for dinner all the time when we're abroad, like in France. And we all appreciate the fact that we're all making food for each other on our $9 a day budget. And we're kind of happier than if we were rich and they all got $100 a day where they go out to restaurants. Like there'd be you wouldn't have earned anything, right?
Well, and they would go do their own thing, or, I think it's also community glue, right? Like that's
right.
Which is a sauce. That's our special.
It's the special sauce. And I mean, I have had, over the years here, I've had plenty of students who've been unhappy and who've left. But almost to a person, the reason they've been unhappy or left is something it's an issue beyond the college's control. And that overwhelmingly the students are really happy. And one of the reasons they're really happy is because of what I talked about earlier. They actually make friends, they're in social communities, and that we're just so happy we get to be here, right? Like I could end with this story. I had a very nice student. This was a while ago. She came to Center because she rode horses. So we're in horse country. But she wanted to be, and she wasn't a good student. I mean, for Center, she was we got a C, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got, and she transferred to UK to be closer to her horses, which is a good school.
Yeah.
And then the next school year, I saw her, I'm like, hey, what? It's so good to see you. Are you visiting? No, she transferred back. And she transferred back because it was too easy there.
Wow.
And it's also in part like there wasn't a secret sauce, right?
Right.
Where you're consciously grateful for what you have. It's a small place, so you know the people you're grateful for, right? You're grateful for each other because we all know each other. Like I'm super grateful for students, right? What's so sad about all this is like I had all these seniors who graduated who I know and care for, right? I wrote them a note. Congratulations.
Right.
It's sad, right? And it's what are you gonna do? I mean,
and you having to, and all Center professors, right? Like having to settle for that, like that would be an exceptional thing to get at another school, like a handwritten note from your professor. But like the fact that was like, that's what I was stuck with.
It's true. I would say I did write them emails. I didn't have their addresses, so I wrote
same thing, right? Like just getting a personal message, like it is rare.
Because usually, like people I would know, we have coffee at the end, we hug at the end, right? It's someone I actually know,
right?
It's the reason I have I get people ask me to write letters of recommendation from 3, 4, 5 years out. It's because I actually know them,
right?
And so that would be probably the secret sauce for us at Center.
That's a great take on the secret sauce, and I agree. I think that is what makes us special. So, any closing thoughts? Do you think we solved world peace over the course of the last hour or so?
If anyone made it this long, I'm sure they feel that we have.
Yeah, agreed. Dr. Tubb, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. I'm so excited to get this uploaded so people can see it and watch it and see what a great place Center is and the great people that'll teach them. And best to you and yours throughout the rest of this time we find ourselves in. But thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. It's been a pleasure. Take care now.
All right, thanks.